At 3:30 in the morning, a uniformed doorman on Broadway heard a sound he would never forget. A sharp wind rush followed by silence. 12 floors above him, a Wall Street partner who once moved millions before lunch had stepped through an open window of the Ansonia. The building did not scream, it absorbed him. In 1904, this palace promised safety, privacy, and status behind walls 3 feet thick, but by the 1970s, it had become something else entirely. The question is not why men fell from the Ansonia. It is why so many of them came here to fall. The Ansonia was designed not just to impress the city, but to protect its residents from ever touching it. When William Earl Dodge Stokes stood before Manhattan in 1901, he did not see opportunity, he saw chaos. The city was louder every year, filthier every season, more intrusive every morning. Immigrants flooded through Ellis Island. Streetcars clanged iron against iron. The rich lived in brownstones where servants slept in attics and neighbors knew your business through shared walls. Stokes wanted something different. He wanted a fortress disguised as a palace. He chose Broadway and 73rd Street because it was just far enough. Far enough from the money downtown, but close enough to matter. Far enough from the tenements, but accessible to culture. The Upper West Side in those years felt unfinished, like a sketch waiting for detail. Stokes would provide that detail in limestone and copper. The architect was Paul Du Bois, a Frenchman who understood that American wealth wanted European dignity. Du Bois drew 17 floors of Beaux-Arts excess, mansard roofs, ornamental turrets, terracotta flourishes that seemed carved by monarchs, not contractors. But beneath the beauty was something else: calculation, control. The Ansonia would contain 2,500 rooms, not apartments, rooms. Each suite could house families or bachelors or anyone willing to pay for privacy behind walls engineered to swallow sound. Stokes insisted on thickness. Floors were reinforced with steel. Walls were poured 3 feet deep. Corridors twisted through the interior like a maze designed to separate classes, purposes, and secrets. Every modern luxury was promised. Electric lights in every room. Central heating controlled from a single basement furnace. Pneumatic tubes to send messages between floors. A telephone exchange staffed around the clock. 2 rooftop gardens where residents could breathe air filtered by height and distance. Bellboys who appeared without being summoned. Maids who entered through separate passages so wealth never had to watch itself being maintained. Stokes spent $4 million. In 1904, that was enough to build 12 ordinary hotels. But the Ansonia was not ordinary. It was the largest apartment hotel in the world, a vertical city where 1,200 people could live without ever leaving the building. The Grand. Opening made headlines. Newspapers called it a modern miracle. Society writers described the lobby as palatial, the suites as European, the amenities as unprecedented. Guests arrived by carriage. They signed leases that guaranteed silence, discretion, and service. They brought trunks of clothes and instruments and ambition. They brought the assumption that walls this thick could contain anything. What Stokes had built was not just luxury, it was insulation. He had weaponized architecture against the world outside. Every brick was a barrier. Every floor was a layer between resident and reality. The building did not invite the city in. It defied intrusion. Inside, residents found something they had never experienced before: complete separation. You could live 30 feet from a neighbor and never hear them breathe. You could host orchestras in your parlor, and the couple below would sleep undisturbed. Privacy was not negotiated here. It was engineered. But there was a cost to that engineering. The same walls that kept the world out also kept residents in. The soundproofing that blocked carriage clatter also muffled cries for help. The corridors that separated classes also isolated individuals. Stokes had built the perfect container. He never asked what happens when containers seal too tightly. By 1905, the Ansonia was full. Every suite leased, every floor occupied. The building hummed with invisible life. Residents praised the silence. Management celebrated capacity. Stokes had proven his vision correct. Safety and luxury could coexist under one copper roof. Protection was the ultimate product. Isolation was just a side effect nobody discussed yet. Inside the Ansonia, servants entered through separate corridors so wealth never had to see itself working. The service architecture was brilliant in its cruelty. While residents walked through lobbies decorated with marble columns and bronze chandeliers, their maids and bellboys traveled through narrow passages hidden behind wallpaper and wood paneling. Two Ansonias existed simultaneously. One was photographed for magazines. The other cleaned the first one before dawn. Morning began at 5. Cooks descended to basement kitchens, where coal fires heated ovens large enough to roast entire pigs. Maids climbed staircases residents never saw, carrying linens and cleaning supplies to suites where they worked in silence. The building employed 300 staff members, doormen, elevator operators, laundry workers, plumbers, electricians, telephone operators who connected calls without listening to conversations. Every role was designed for invisibility. Residents lived like royalty detached from kingdoms. They woke to breakfast delivered on silver trays. They bathed in porcelain tubs fed by the building's own water filtration system. They dressed in walk-in closets lined with cedar. Then they stepped into parlors where grand pianos waited and floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below like a painting they owned but never touched. The tenant list read like a cultural census of early 20th century ambition. Babe Ruth leased a suite on the 8th floor during his Yankees years. He practiced his swing in the hallway when rain canceled games. Igor Stravinsky lived there while composing. Enrico Caruso rehearsed arias that neighbors never heard because the walls absorbed opera as easily as arguments. Florin Ziegfeld kept rooms for his performers. Lily Langtry, the actress who captivated London, chose the Ansonia when she toured America because it promised her anonymity between shows. They came for different reasons, but shared one need: distance from scrutiny. The Ansonia offered fame without fanfare. You could be Babe Ruth in the elevator and anonymous in your suite. The building protected reputations by design. Thick walls meant private scandals stayed private. Separate entrances meant mistresses could visit without doormen gossiping. Soundproofing meant arguments dissolved into plaster instead of echoing through hallways. But luxury without witnesses creates strange psychology. When no one hears you, do you exist? When walls erase every sound you make, does your voice still matter? Residents began to notice something unsettling. The silence was too perfect. Children played in suites, and parents 2 rooms away heard nothing. Couples fought without neighbors intervening. Musicians practiced until their fingers bled and received no applause from adjacent apartments. The building had created privacy so complete it felt like isolation. You could live among 1,200 people and still feel alone. The lobby buzzed with activity during certain hours, but suites stayed quiet as tombs. Residents learned to perform happiness in public spaces and retreat to private silence. The Ansonia rewarded those who kept secrets, even from themselves. Still, the glamour was undeniable. The rooftop fountains sprayed water 70 feet into the air. The lobby hosted recitals where world-class musicians played to audiences who lived upstairs. The dining room served French cuisine prepared by chefs imported from Paris. Every amenity suggested civilization at its peak. But civilization here meant separation from the city, from each other, from anything that demanded vulnerability. By 1920, the Ansonia had established itself as the address for those who wanted New York's prestige without New York's proximity. Performers loved it because they could practice without complaints. Socialites loved it because they could entertain without explaining themselves to family. Businessmen loved it because they could conduct meetings in suites that felt like private clubs. Everyone loved it because the walls kept secrets better than lawyers. What no one acknowledged was how secrecy breeds loneliness. The same discretion that protected affairs also prevented friendships. The same soundproofing that enabled music also silenced cries for help. The building had become a paradox, communal living that guaranteed solitude, shared space that prevented connection, a palace where everyone was royalty and no one had subjects. The Ansonia thrived on this contradiction. Management advertised isolation as luxury. Residents paid premiums for separation. The city outside grew louder and the building grew quieter. Walls thickened with every renovation. Corridors multiplied. Privacy became the product worth more than gold. And when someone finally broke in that privacy, when crisis demanded witnesses, the building had already taught everyone how not to hear. Bigger was not an accident here, it was a philosophy carved into limestone and copper. The Ansonia was excessive by design. 17 floors when most buildings capped at 10. 2,500 rooms when competitors offered hundreds. Lobbies that stretched 80 feet from entrance to elevator. Ceilings high enough to host chandeliers that weighed half a ton. Every measurement exceeded necessity. That was the point. Stokes believed size conferred permanence. Small buildings could be demolished. Large ones became landmarks whether the city wanted them or not. He was correct. By 1930, Manhattan had torn down dozens of hotels and apartment buildings to make room for skyscrapers. But the Ansonia stayed, too big to ignore, too expensive to replace, too embedded in the neighborhood's identity to erase. The building occupied an entire city block, from Broadway to Amsterdam Avenue, from 73rd to 74th Street. Pedestrians could walk its perimeter and feel surrounded by a single architectural will. The facade did not apologize for blocking sunlight from neighboring structures. The turrets did not defer to more modern designs rising downtown. The Ansonia existed as its own argument. Scale equals survival. Inside, that scale created a vertical ecosystem. The basement housed machinery that could power a small town, furnaces, generators, water pumps, coal storage rooms larger than most Manhattan apartments. Maintenance staff worked in subterranean chambers the public never saw, keeping the building alive through pipes and wires and constant repair. The ground floor was theater, marble everywhere, columns imported from Italy, floors polished until they reflected chandeliers like still water. The lobby was designed to announce arrival as transformation. You entered from the chaos of Broadway and immediately stood inside European grandeur. The message was clear. The outside world ended at the door. Upper floors replicated this grandeur in miniature. Each suite functioned as a self-contained residence. Parlors, bedrooms, bathrooms with porcelain fixtures, kitchenettes for those who preferred privacy over the dining room, windows that framed views of Central Park to the east or the Hudson River to the west. Residents could live entire lives without descending to street level. The rooftop completed the separation: 2 gardens, fountains, seating areas surrounded by balustrades. From 17 stories up, Manhattan looked manageable. The noise faded. The crowds shrank to dots. The city became scenery instead of something that touched you. Residents described the rooftop as peaceful, romantic, transcendent. What they meant was distant. By 1940, the Ansonia had survived the Depression while other luxury buildings foreclosed. It had outlasted Art Deco towers that promised modernity. It remained full when hotels across the city advertised vacancies. Size had indeed become survival. But survival without evolution breeds obsolescence. The building that seemed modern in 1904 felt antiquated by mid-century. Central heating was standard everywhere now. Telephone exchanges were automated. Pneumatic tubes were replaced by faster communication. The amenities that once defined luxury now defined aged infrastructure. Still, the Ansonia persisted because it had become too large to fail quietly. Ownership changed hands. Stokes died. Investors bought the property. Management companies took over leasing. But the building itself remained stubbornly unchanged. The same limestone exterior, the same copper roof turning green with oxidation, the same lobbies and corridors and 3-foot walls. Renovations happened in increments too small to alter the fundamental character. The Ansonia was locked into its original form by its own mass. Tenants began to shift. The performers and socialites who defined its early decades aged or moved. Rent control laws after World War II made long-term leases economically complicated. New residents arrived seeking different things. Not glamour, not culture, anonymity, proximity to midtown offices, apartments large enough to impress without the cost of townhouses. The building that once housed Stravinsky now sheltered stockbrokers who had never attended an opera. This transition went largely unnoticed. The Ansonia was still the Ansonia, still prestigious by address, still imposing by size, still capable of making residents feel protected from whatever threatened them outside. Management did not care who signed leases as long as checks cleared. The walls did not discriminate between artists and accountants. Both needed the same thing: space to hide inside excess. By 1960, the Ansonia had become a monument to its own past. Tourists photographed the exterior. Architectural historians praised the Beaux-Arts details. But inside, something had shifted. The building was no longer aspirational. It was refuge, not for those climbing toward success, but for those clinging to it. The difference mattered more than anyone realized. Ambition looks forward. Fear looks for walls thick enough to contain it. The question was never whether the Ansonia would survive. Its size guaranteed that. The question was what kind of survival counted, and what happened when the people inside stopped thriving and started merely enduring. The building did not care. It had been designed to contain, not to nurture. And containment, taken to its logical extreme, eventually resembles a tomb. Residents praised the silence, never realizing what that silence would eventually protect. The 3-foot walls were marvels of 1904 engineering. Stokes had insisted on density. Contractors poured concrete mixed with aggregate, heavy enough to stop vibration. Plasterers added layers of soundproofing material, experimental for its time. Carpenters built interior frameworks that isolated each room from its neighbors. The result was acoustic separation, so complete it felt supernatural. A resident could play a trombone at midnight, and the neighbor 30 feet away would sleep undisturbed. Children could scream during tantrums, and hallways stayed silent. Arguments that should have echoed through apartments dissolved into walls that absorbed rage like blotting paper soaking ink. The Ansonia did not just reduce noise, it erased it. Early tenants celebrated this feature, musicians especially. They could rehearse without constraint. Opera singers could practice scales at dawn. Pianists could repeat difficult passages for hours. The building became an acoustic sanctuary where sound existed only for those creating it. Management advertised this heavily. Come to the Ansonia and never disturb your neighbors. Live without compromise. Privacy guaranteed. But absolute silence has psychological effects engineers never consider. Sound is connection. Hearing your neighbor's footsteps confirms you are not alone. A child's laughter through the ceiling means families exist nearby. Even arguments remind us that others struggle too. Strip that away and you create sensory deprivation, disguised as luxury. Residents began reporting strange experiences. They would forget other people lived in the building. Days passed without hearing another human voice unless they left their suite. Some found it liberating. Others found it unsettling. One tenant in 1938 told a friend it felt like living in a beautiful prison where the bars were invisible and the guards were absent, but escape still seemed impossible. The walls did more than block sound. They blocked evidence of life. When someone in a neighboring suite suffered a heart attack and collapsed, no one heard the fall. When a woman on the 9th floor sobbed through the night after her husband's death, the couple next door slept peacefully. When a musician on the 12th floor practiced the same piece for 16 hours straight, driven by perfectionism that bordered on madness, no one intervened because no one knew. The building had created perfect isolation, privacy without witnesses, suffering without interruption. The same architecture that enabled artistic freedom also enabled complete personal collapse without external detection. If you screamed in your Ansonia suite and no one heard it, did you make a sound? The walls said no. By the 1950s, a new kind of tenant was moving in. Not artists, not socialites, professionals, lawyers, accountants, stockbrokers, men who worked in midtown offices and wanted apartments large enough to entertain clients, but not so far north they lost prestige. The Ansonia offered both. Upper West Side respectability, reasonable distance to Wall Street, and walls that guaranteed no one would overhear business conversations conducted over cocktails in private parlors. These men brought different psychology. Artists thrive on expression. Financiers thrive on control. When markets turned against them, artists could channel pain into work. Financiers had only numbers. And when numbers went negative, the silence of the Ansonia meant no one heard the despair. The first recorded broker suicide happened in 1957. The newspapers printed 2 paragraphs. A partner at a small investment firm jumped from his 14th floor window at 4 a.m. Police found him on the courtyard pavement. Management released a statement expressing sympathy. Residents told investigators they heard nothing unusual. The walls had done their job. The death stayed private until the body could not be ignored. No one connected the architecture to the outcome. Jumpers existed in every tall building. This was New York, tragic but not anomalous. Management ordered a brief review of window locks. Nothing changed. The Ansonia continued leasing suites. Brokers continued moving in. The walls continued swallowing sound. But something had been established, a pattern that would take decades to recognize. The building attracted men under pressure. Pressure creates stress. Stress seeks privacy. Privacy enables despair. Despair finds release. And walls 3 feet thick ensure that release happens in silence until gravity makes it public. Architects designed for function. Stokes designed for separation. He succeeded beyond his imagination. The Ansonia had become a place where crisis could unfold entirely alone, where a man could stand at a window contemplating the worst decision of his life, and no neighbor would sense the weight hanging in the adjacent suite. The soundproofing that protected artistic rehearsal also protected final contemplations. By 1960, residents still praised the silence. Real estate agents still advertised it as the building's greatest feature. But silence is not neutral. It is absence. And absence, when extended long enough, becomes a kind of suffocation. The Ansonia had learned to keep secrets so well that eventually those secrets could only escape through open windows. As Broadway dimmed, the lights stayed on inside the Ansonia longer than anywhere else. The cultural geography of Manhattan shifted dramatically after World War II. Broadway, which had defined the neighborhood for decades, began losing its dominance. Theaters closed or converted to cinemas. Performers moved to newer buildings or left the city entirely. The glamour that once radiated from the Ansonia's lobbies faded like stage makeup under harsh morning light. But economics abhors vacuums. As artists departed, another class arrived: financiers. The post-war boom transformed Wall Street from a regional concern into a global engine. Money flowed through Manhattan in volumes that required new infrastructure. Trading floors expanded. Brokerage firms multiplied. Partnerships formed and dissolved based on quarterly performance. Young men with degrees in economics flooded the city seeking fortunes their fathers never imagined. They needed housing, not penthouses yet. They had not earned that, but apartments impressive enough to host clients. Close enough to Midtown to matter, far enough from the financial district to maintain separation between work and life. The Ansonia offered all three: Upper West Side prestige, reasonable subway access, suites designed for entertaining. By 1955, the tenant mix had fundamentally changed. Lease records show the shift. In 1940, 60% of residents listed creative professions: musicians, writers, actors, designers. By 1960, 60% listed financial services: brokers, analysts, fund managers, junior partners climbing toward senior positions. They brought different energy. Artists measure success in applause and reviews. Financiers measure it in basis points and account balances. Both face rejection, but artistic rejection is subjective. Financial rejection is mathematical. When the market says you are wrong, there is no interpretation, just numbers turning red. The 1960s introduced volatility. Wall Street had not experienced since the Depression. The market crashed in 1962. The Dow Jones lost 22% in 6 months. Fortunes evaporated. Partnerships dissolved. Men who moved millions in January were unemployed by June. The psychological toll was immediate and severe. Inside the Ansonia, pressure concentrated. Brokers who lived on different floors worked for competing firms. They rode the same elevators, shopped at the same neighborhood grocers, walked past each other in lobbies without acknowledging shared terror. Everyone knew everyone else was suffering. No one discussed it. The building's culture of privacy forbade vulnerability. You could lose everything and still had to pretend success when signing for packages. The walls that once protected artistic rehearsal now protected financial shame. A broker could sit in his parlor reviewing statements that detailed catastrophic losses, and his neighbor would never know. Marriages could fracture under debt pressure without hallway witnesses. Phone calls with furious clients could happen at any volume because soundproofing guaranteed discretion. The Ansonia had become a perfect container for private collapse. Market downturns create predictable patterns. First comes denial, then panic, then desperate attempts at recovery. Finally, for some, resignation. The building watched this cycle repeat across multiple suites simultaneously. Men who had been confident in 1961 were broken by 1963. Some recovered. Some changed careers. Some stopped appearing in lobbies. The 1962 crash claimed the second recorded jumper. A 41-year-old portfolio manager, 10th floor, 3 in the morning. His wife was visiting family in Connecticut. Neighbors heard nothing. The doorman found him at dawn. Police ruled it suicide within hours. The firm issued a statement about mental health. Management increased security patrols. Nothing structural changed. This time, whispers started. 2 jumpers in 5 years. Both brokers. Both during market stress. Both from upper floors. Residents began noticing the pattern, even if they did not speak it aloud. The building had developed a reputation, not public yet, just murmurs in elevators and careful questions when friends considered leasing. But reputation did not slow occupancy. The Ansonia was still prestigious, still cheaper than comparable addresses, still offering space and privacy unmatched elsewhere on the Upper West Side. Brokers kept moving in because the alternative was admitting the whispers might be true. And Wall Street culture forbids admitting fear. The 1970s would test that culture beyond endurance. The market crashed again in 1973. Oil embargoes, stagflation, unemployment. The Dow lost 45% of its value over 2 years. Firms that survived the 60s collapsed in the 70s. Entire sectors of the financial industry restructured. Men who thought they had recovered from 1962 discovered they had only delayed reckoning. Inside the Ansonia, the pressure became unbearable. The building that promised protection now felt like a trap. Thick walls that once symbolized safety now symbolized isolation. Residents could not hear each other breaking, but they could sense it. In lobbies, in elevators. In the way men avoided eye contact and conversations ended abruptly when markets were mentioned. Broadway had faded. The artists had left. What remained was a vertical chamber filled with men whose identities depended on numbers they could not control. The Ansonia had traded culture for capital, applause for anxiety. And when anxiety has nowhere to escape, it travels upward until it finds an open window. The newspapers printed a paragraph, the management issued condolences, and the building remained silent. 1957, January 14th, 4:17 in the morning. A uniformed doorman stood beneath the Ansonia's Broadway entrance, performing the ritual of his shift, watching taxis, monitoring the street, waiting for residents who arrived home late from parties or business dinners. The night was cold enough to see breath, but clear enough to see stars between buildings. Then he heard it, a sound he would describe to police as wind rushing past fabric. It lasted less than 2 seconds. The impact that followed was soft, quieter than expected. A body does not crash when it falls from 14 floors. It collapses, folds into itself, becomes something that was a person, and now is evidence. The doorman ran toward the courtyard. The body lay face down on pavement, still damp from recent rain. Dark suit, leather shoes, wedding ring catching streetlight. No identification immediately visible, just a man who moments earlier had been alive inside a building designed to protect him. Police arrived within 12 minutes, detectives within 30. They climbed to the 14th floor and found the open window in suite 1412. The apartment belonged to Richard Hammond, 43 partner at a small investment firm on Wall Street. His wife confirmed he had been despondent about recent market losses. His firm confirmed he faced potential termination. His doctor confirmed prescriptions for anxiety. The investigation concluded before dawn. Suicide. Case closed. The New York Times ran 147 words on page 32. Investment partner dies in fall. No details about the building. No questions about patterns. Just facts delivered without context. Man falls. Man dies. Life continues. The Ansonia was mentioned only as location. Management responded with institutional efficiency. A memo to staff about sensitivity and discretion. A brief statement to remaining residents assuring them the building was safe. Increased patrols during overnight hours. A review of window locks that concluded existing mechanisms were adequate. The courtyard was cleaned by sunrise. By evening, no physical evidence remained, but memory remained. The residents of the 14th floor knew. The doorman knew. The neighbors who saw police in the hallways knew. Word spread quietly through the building like water seeping through cracks. A broker had jumped during financial stress. From an upper floor, the pattern was not yet visible because patterns require repetition. This was just tragedy. Sad but singular. Except it was not singular. It was the first recorded instance in a sequence that would span decades. Richard Hammond established a template the building would follow. Financial pressure, male resident, upper floor, early morning, minimal witness, maximum silence. The Ansonia absorbed his death the way it absorbed sound, completely, quietly, without allowing disruption to spread beyond necessary boundaries. The windows stayed the same, large casement windows that opened outward with minimal resistance. No guards, no bars, no preventive architecture. Stokes had designed them for ventilation and views. Fresh air from 17 floors up, unobstructed sightlines across Manhattan. The possibility of jumping had not occurred to anyone in 1904. Buildings were aspirational then. Height meant achievement. Windows facing outward meant looking toward the future. By 1957, windows meant options. And, for men under sufficient pressure, options become solutions. The Ansonia offered privacy to contemplate those solutions. Soundproofing to ensure contemplation stayed private. Access to height without obstacles. And a culture that discouraged neighbors from intervening in personal crises. The building had accidentally created perfect conditions for worst outcomes. 5 years passed. The memory of Richard Hammond faded. New residents moved in without knowing his name. Leases turned over. The 14th floor suite was renovated and re-leased within 3 months. Management saw no reason to disclose its history. The building's reputation remained intact, prestigious, safe, desirable. One suicide did not define a structure that housed 1,200 people successfully. Then 1962 arrived. The market crashed. Another broker jumped. Another early morning. Another upper floor. Another quiet removal followed by minimal publicity. This time, the whispers grew louder. 2 jumpers, both brokers, both from the Ansonia. Coincidence or pattern? Management insisted coincidence. Residents wanted to believe them, but doubt had been planted. The problem with patterns is they only become visible in retrospect. While living through events, everything feels isolated, random, unconnected. Only later, when someone assembles the timeline, does the design emerge. Richard Hammond was not the first fall. He was the first recorded fall. The difference matters. How many others had there been? How many quiet removals before newspapers started noticing? How many families received condolences without public acknowledgement? The building kept no official record. Why would it? Suicides were private tragedies. Management's job was leasing apartments, not tracking mortality. Police documented cases individually without cross-referencing location. Medical examiners processed bodies without analyzing building trends. Everyone saw fragments, no one saw the whole. What emerged in fragments was this. The Ansonia had become attractive to a specific demographic under specific pressure. Financial professionals, male, middle-aged, facing career collapse during market volatility. They chose the building for privacy. They stayed for inertia. They fell when pressure exceeded endurance and architecture provided means. Richard Hammond was the first name attached to this pattern, not the first victim, just the first one we can name with certainty. The building absorbed him and continued, because buildings do not mourn, they contain. And the Ansonia, with its 3-foot walls and 17 floors and culture of absolute discretion, had learned to contain anything except the truth about what happened when privacy became indistinguishable from abandonment. By the 1970s, failure traveled upward in the Ansonia before it ever fell. The building had become something its architect never intended. Not a palace, a container, specifically a container for men whose professional identities were collapsing in real time. The 1970s delivered economic conditions that turned Wall Street into a battlefield. The market crashed in 1973 and kept falling. The Dow Jones lost 45% of its value over 18 months. Oil embargoes quadrupled energy prices. Inflation reached double digits. Unemployment spiked. The word stagflation entered common vocabulary because the old rules of economics no longer applied. Inside brokerage firms, the carnage was immediate. Partnerships dissolved. Trading desks emptied. Analysts who predicted recoveries found themselves predicting which colleagues would survive layoffs. The industry that had promised wealth now threatened ruin. Men who had spent decades climbing towards senior positions watched those positions evaporate in quarterly reports colored entirely red. The Ansonia concentrated this pressure. By 1974, conservative estimates suggest at least 300 residents worked in financial services. They lived on different floors, worked for different firms, competed for the same limited capital. But they shared the same building, same elevators, same lobbies, same silent apartments where failure could be contemplated without neighbors overhearing. The walls that had once protected privacy now amplified isolation. A broker could return home after catastrophic losses and enter a suite where no sound escaped. He could sit in darkness, reviewing statements that detailed destroyed savings. He could pace 17 steps from window to door and back again while calculating debts that exceeded assets. He could do this for hours, for days, and no one in the adjacent suite would know. This isolation created psychological echo chambers. Without external voices to challenge catastrophic thinking, internal narratives spiraled. A bad quarter became proof of incompetence. A single margin call became evidence of worthlessness. The market's rejection felt personal because there was no one nearby to remind the sufferer that markets punish everyone eventually. The building's silence allowed despair to amplify itself until it drowned rational thought. The pattern accelerated. 1973. A commodity trader, 12th floor. 5 in the morning, 1974, an options specialist. 15th floor, 2:40 in the morning, 1975, a portfolio manager. 11th floor, 3:30 in the morning. Each case followed the same template. Financial professional, market downturn, upper floor, early morning, minimal witnesses, quick removal. Management could no longer dismiss this as coincidence. 3 jumps in 3 years from the same building during the same economic crisis exceeded statistical randomness. But acknowledging patterns meant acknowledging responsibility. What could management do? Install bars on windows? That would confirm the building had a problem. Increase overnight security? That would frighten current residents and repel potential ones. The only viable strategy was continued discretion. Treat each case as isolated, issue condolences, cooperate with police, then resume normal operations. Residents developed coping mechanisms. Some refused to discuss the jumps. Others whispered about them in lobbies, but never in elevators where proximity felt too intimate. A few moved out quietly without citing reasons. Most stayed because admitting fear meant confronting truths they preferred to avoid. The Ansonia had developed a reputation among brokers. Everyone knew, no one spoke it aloud. The building had become an open secret in financial circles. The numbers tell the story management refused to acknowledge. Between 1973 and 1979, at least 7 confirmed suicides involved residents who worked in finance. That is 1 per year during the market's worst decade since the Depression. All jumpers, all male, all upper floors, all early morning hours, when the building was quietest and escape meant the least chance of intervention. But statistics alone do not capture the atmosphere. The Ansonia in the mid-70s felt haunted not by ghosts, but by the living. Residents walked through lobbies, avoiding eye contact. Elevator rides happened in silence. Neighbors who once exchanged pleasantries now simply nodded. The building had taught everyone that privacy mattered more than connection. Now that lesson was killing people. Psychologists would later identify this as environmental contagion, not supernatural, psychological. When a location develops association with specific outcomes, the association itself influences behavior. The Ansonia had become known among stressed brokers as a place where men jumped. That knowledge created permission. If others had done it here, the act seemed less abnormal, less transgressive, almost routine. The building had accidentally normalized the worst possible decision. The architecture amplified this. 17 floors provided height. Large windows provided access. Soundproof walls provided privacy to contemplate without interruption. The combination was lethal. A man in crisis did not need to plan. He just needed to open a window. The building made the worst choice, the easiest choice. And in moments of extreme despair, ease matters more than consequence. By 1979, the whispers had become warnings. Brokers advised colleagues against leasing there. Wives researched the building's history before allowing husbands to sign leases. Real estate agents began showing alternative properties first. But the Ansonia's reputation had split. To outsiders, it was dangerous. To insiders, it was home. The men most at risk were the men most resistant to leaving. They had invested in the building, financially and psychologically. Abandoning their suites felt like admitting defeat twice, once to the market, once to architecture. The building itself remained unchanged. Same limestone, exterior, same copper roof, same lobbies and corridors and 3-foot walls. But something had shifted in its purpose. It was no longer protecting residents from the outside world. It was containing pressure until pressure found release. The Ansonia had become a vertical chamber where failure concentrated floor by floor until weight exceeded endurance and gravity provided the only exit that felt possible. Brokers whispered warnings in elevators they still kept riding. The rumors started small. A conversation between junior analysts at a midtown bar. One mentions he is considering an Ansonia lease. The other pauses mid-drink and says, "You know about that building, right?" The tone conveys everything, not facts, just weight. The conversation ends without details, but the warning lands. By the early 1980s, every major firm on Wall Street had at least one employee who knew someone who jumped from the Ansonia. The connections were never direct enough to verify, always second or third hand. But repetition creates truth in the absence of contradiction. The building had become synonymous with broker suicides, even among people who had never visited. Real estate agents faced a delicate problem. The Ansonia remained a prestigious address, historic, beautiful, well located, but prospective tenants researched. They asked questions. Have there been incidents? Is it true what they say about the building? Agents developed careful language. The Ansonia has a long history. Like any large building, it has seen tragedies over the decades. Would you like to see the parlor? Deflection masquerading as transparency. Some residents embraced the reputation with dark humor, gallows comedy as coping mechanism. They joked about checking window locks before market downturns, about avoiding upper floors during earnings seasons, about rating the building's suites by jump risk instead of square footage. The humor was defensive, laughing at death before death could surprise them. The building facilitated this too. Privacy meant no one policed inappropriate jokes. Soundproofing meant laughter stayed contained. But alongside rational explanations, something else emerged. Ghost stories. Reports of paranormal activity concentrated around specific windows. Residents on the 14th floor claimed cold spots appeared near the window Richard Hammond used in 1957. A tenant on the 12th floor insisted she heard crying at night from an empty neighboring suite. Another swore his television turned on by itself at 3:30 in the morning, always tuned to financial news. These stories spread through informal networks, dinner parties, lobby conversations, late-night discussions between neighbors who had lived there long enough to remember multiple jumps. The accounts shared common elements. Specific windows felt heavier to open. Certain suites retained coldness regardless of heating. Upper floors developed reputations as unsettled. Residents requested transfers to lower floors without explaining why. Paranormal investigators requested access. Management refused, not because they feared confirmation, because they feared publicity. Whether ghosts existed or not was irrelevant. The suggestion that the Ansonia was haunted would compound the existing reputation. Better to maintain silence and let rumors circulate without official acknowledgement. But silence creates space for imagination. Without authoritative explanations, residents invented their own. One theory suggested the building's density trapped spiritual energy the way it trapped sound. Thick walls prevented the deceased from leaving. Another proposed that the concentration of despair had saturated the architecture itself. The limestone absorbed suffering until the building became a physical manifestation of collective pain. Both theories were unprovable. Both spread anyway. Psychologists offered alternative explanations. Grief seeking meaning. Pattern, recognition bias. Collective memory creating shared narrative. The mind's need to find coherence in tragedy. If 7 men jumped from the same building, surely the building bore responsibility, not the economic system, not the culture of financial pressure. The building, because blaming architecture is easier than blaming ourselves. The truth likely lived between extremes, no ghosts, but real atmospheric weight. The Ansonia had accumulated decades of private suffering within walls designed to contain everything. That suffering did not manifest as specters. It manifested as reputation, as collective knowledge that terrible things happened here repeatedly. That knowledge changed how residents experienced the space. Hallways felt lonelier, windows felt more dangerous. Silence felt less like luxury and more like warning. By 1985, the building faced reputational crisis. Occupancy rates declined. Leases sat unsigned. Wealthy tenants chose newer buildings without histories. The Ansonia was competing against modern high-rises with doormen who smiled and lobbies that felt optimistic and apartments where previous tenants had not died violently. Management attempted rebranding, renovations, upgraded amenities, marketing campaigns emphasizing history and architecture. But reputation is harder to renovate than lobbies. You cannot strip memory the way you strip wallpaper. The jumps had happened. The bodies had fallen. No amount of fresh paint changed what the Ansonia meant to people who knew its story. Some residents stayed specifically because of the reputation. They were drawn to darkness, to history, to the idea of living inside a building that contained such weight. Artists moved back in, writers seeking atmospheric inspiration, musicians who appreciated tragic beauty. The demographic shifted again, away from finance, toward those who romanticize decay. But romanticizing tragedy does not erase it. The building still had windows, still had 17 floors, still had walls that isolated residents from each other and the outside world. The architecture that created conditions for past deaths remained unchanged. Whether future deaths would occur depended not on ghosts, but on who moved in next and what pressures they brought with them. The Ansonia had become a test of belief, of courage, of willingness to live inside a beautiful structure that had proven beauty could not prevent horror. Some passed the test by moving in anyway. Others failed by refusing to consider it. But everyone who heard the building's name now heard the whispers too. The warnings, the stories, the question no marketing campaign could answer. Is it worth the risk to live inside a palace built to contain power if that power eventually turned inward and fell? Renovation crews stripped marble, but memory clung harder than mold. By the mid-1980s, the Ansonia faced existential threat, not physical collapse, financial irrelevance. The building could not compete with new construction. Modern high-rises offered central air conditioning, updated electrical systems, and floor plans designed for contemporary living. The Ansonia offered history, which attracted a shrinking market willing to pay premiums for the past. Ownership changed hands multiple times during the decade. Each new investor arrived with identical vision: restore grandeur, attract wealthy tenants, transform the building into the palace Stokes had imagined. Each discovered the same problem: grandeur costs money and reputation costs more. The Ansonia needed both and had neither. Renovation began in phases. The lobby received attention first. Contractors removed layers of paint accumulated over 80 years. They uncovered original marble beneath decades of modifications. Chandeliers were rewired. Floors were repolished. The entrance was restored to approximate its 1904 glory. The work cost millions. It attracted photographers and architectural journalists, but it did not attract enough new tenants to justify the expense. Upper floors proved more challenging. Suites had been subdivided repeatedly. Original layouts disappeared under cheap renovations done by cash-strapped owners during the 1970s. Plumbing was outdated. Wiring violated modern codes. Windows needed replacement. Each apartment required essentially complete reconstruction. The cost per unit approached what new construction would cost elsewhere without the complications of historic preservation requirements. Management made difficult decisions. Some floors were renovated completely. Others were left untouched, pending future capital. The building developed internal inequality. Residents on renovated floors lived in updated luxury. Residents on untouched floors lived in genteel decay. The contrast created tension. Why should some tenants enjoy modernization while others endured obsolescence under the same roof? The Ansonia had always separated classes. Now it separated them vertically by floor instead of horizontally by corridor. But the deepest problem was not structural, it was psychological. You can replace marble and rewire chandeliers, but you cannot renovate away 7 documented suicides. Prospective tenants toured updated suites and asked the same question. Which windows did they use? Real estate agents learned to deflect. That is not something we discuss. But silence confirmed what prospects feared. The building remembered, even if management pretended otherwise. Some units became unleasable, not because of condition, because of history. The 14th floor suite, where Richard Hammond jumped in 1957, sat vacant for 3 years during the 80s. Management renovated it twice. New floors, new fixtures, new windows with locks designed to prevent opening beyond 6 inches. Still, it remained empty. Word had spread. Brokers knew the apartment number. They avoided it the way superstitious people avoid the 13th floor. The building tried everything short of acknowledging its reputation directly. Discounted rents, flexible lease terms, upgraded amenities, free parking. None of it overcame the fundamental barrier. The Ansonia had become known as the building where brokers jumped. That knowledge spread faster than any marketing campaign could counter. Every glossy brochure competed against whispered warnings from friends who had heard the stories. By 1988, occupancy had dropped to 60%. Entire floors sat dark. Management reduced staff. Maintenance declined. The lobbies that had been renovated just years earlier began showing wear again. The building entered a vicious cycle. Low occupancy meant less revenue. Less revenue meant deferred maintenance. Deferred maintenance made the building less attractive. Less attractive meant lower occupancy. The Ansonia was spiraling toward the same fate as dozens of other Gilded Age relics: demolition. Preservationists fought this outcome. The Faaiwi building had landmark status, architectural significance, cultural value. But preservation laws protected exteriors, not viability. You cannot force people to live somewhere they associate with death. The market was rendering its verdict. The Ansonia had failed to evolve beyond its reputation. Then came an unexpected pivot: conversion to cooperative ownership. In 1992, the building was sold to a group that proposed converting rental units into individually owned apartments. Residents could purchase their suites. Investors could buy units as assets. The building would survive not as a rental palace, but as a collective enterprise where owners shared stake in the structure's future. The conversion succeeded partially. Some residents bought immediately. Others left rather than commit. New owners arrived, attracted by below-market prices and prime location. The building stabilized financially without solving its deeper problems. Cooperative ownership distributed. responsibility, but did not erase history. The windows that men had jumped through were now owned by individuals instead of managed by landlords. The difference was legal, not existential. Renovations continued in fits and starts. Individual owners upgraded their units. Common areas received attention when capital allowed. The Ansonia slowly improved while never fully escaping its past. Walk through the lobbies today and you see both. Original grandeur restored in places, neglected corners in others. The building has become a physical manifestation of incomplete transformation. What management learned is that some reputations cannot be renovated away. The Ansonia will always be the building where brokers jumped during market crashes. That truth is embedded in public memory deeper than any marble is embedded in the facade. You can change ownership structures, update mechanical systems, polish brass until it gleams. But you cannot erase 7 documented deaths and likely more undocumented ones. The building tried, the building failed, and in that failure, it revealed something profound. Architecture can be restored. Innocence cannot. The question facing the Ansonia was no longer whether it could reclaim past glory. It was whether it could survive with a history too heavy to discard and too dark to celebrate. The answer proved to be yes. Barely, expensively, incompletely. The building stands today as proof that survival and redemption are not synonyms. You can endure without being forgiven. You can persist without being trusted. And you can remain beautiful while containing memories too painful to acknowledge in marketing brochures. Residents say certain windows feel heavier than others, especially at night. Walk the 14th floor corridor at midnight and you will notice something. Temperature drops 6 degrees near suite 1412. Not every night, not predictably, but frequently enough that residents have stopped dismissing it as draft. The apartment has changed hands 4 times since 1992. Each owner reports the same phenomenon. Coldness that appears suddenly, lingers, then dissipates without explanation. Paranormal investigators call these cold spots evidence of spiritual presence. Physicists call them air circulation anomalies. Psychologists call them confirmation bias. The residents who experience them call them unsettling, regardless of cause. Because whether the coldness comes from ghosts or gaps in insulation, it still makes a room feel occupied by something other than the living. The 12th floor has its own peculiarity. Suite 1207. The window in the master bedroom resists opening. Not locked, not sealed, just heavy. Tenants describe it as feeling weighted, as though atmospheric pressure pushes back against attempts to raise the sash. Maintenance has examined the mechanism repeatedly, found nothing mechanically wrong, lubricated the tracks, adjusted the counterweights. Still, the window fights, as though the building learned from past mistakes and now refuses to cooperate with gravity. Other accounts are less tangible. Sounds that might be pipes or might be crying. Shadows that might be headlights through curtains, or might be movement in empty hallways. Elevators that pause at floors where no one requested stops. Lights that flicker during market downturns as though the building still tracks Wall Street's performance and reacts to crashes with electrical instability. Skeptics dismiss all of this easily. Old buildings make noise. Pipes expand and contract. Electrical systems degrade. Human minds seek patterns and invent narratives to explain coincidence. The Ansonia is not haunted. It is just old. Its residents are not experiencing paranormal activity. They are experiencing the normal acoustic and thermal behavior of a structure built over a century ago using materials and methods no longer common, but even skeptics acknowledge something undeniable. The building feels different, not haunted necessarily, but weighted, as though the accumulated history has created atmospheric pressure that resists forgetting. Walk through the lobbies and you sense it. Not ghosts, just residue. The kind that clings to places where terrible things happened repeatedly enough to saturate stone and steel with collective memory. One resident, a psychiatrist who has lived in the building since 1995, offers a different framework. He suggests the building functions as a monument, not intentionally, but practically. Every structure where significant events occurred becomes a repository for those events. Battlefields feel different than parks. Hospitals feel different than hotels. The Ansonia feels different because it contains knowledge of what happened within its walls. That knowledge shapes how people experience the space, not paranormally, psychologically. This explanation satisfies some residents and frustrates others. Those who want to believe in ghosts find it reductive. Those who want rational comfort find it insufficient. Both groups continue living in the building anyway, because the Ansonia offers something more valuable than freedom from disturbing phenomena. It offers connection to history, real history, documented history, the kind you can research and verify and touch through the same windows men touched before stepping through them. Artists particularly value this connection. The building has experienced a renaissance among creative professionals drawn to its atmospheric weight. Writers rent suites specifically because of the reputation. They want to live inside a structure that contains tragedy, want to absorb whatever energy or memory or psychological residue might inform their work. The Ansonia has become a pilgrimage site for those who romanticize darkness without experiencing it directly. Musicians have returned too, not on the scale of Stravinsky or Caruso, but enough to restore some of the building's original cultural purpose. Practice rooms on lower floors echo with piano and violin and voice. The soundproofing that once isolated suffering now isolates creativity again. Neighbors do not complain about noise because they do not hear it. The walls still do their job. Whether that job is protection or imprisonment depends entirely on who lives behind them. The cooperative structure has created unexpected community. Owners attend monthly meetings to discuss maintenance and governance. They vote on repairs and renovations. They share responsibility for the building's future in ways renters never did. This forced interaction has broken some of the isolation that defined the Ansonia for decades. Not completely. The apartments still seal residents off from each other acoustically, but at least now they gather regularly in common spaces and acknowledge each other's existence beyond elevator nods. Still, certain windows remain heavy. Certain hallways remain cold. Certain nights, residents hear sounds they cannot explain and choose not to investigate. The building keeps its secrets even from those who own pieces of it. And maybe that is appropriate. Maybe some histories should remain partially hidden, accessible enough to acknowledge, obscure enough to respect. The paranormal remains unproven. The rational explanations remain incomplete. The building exists in the space between both, haunted by facts if not by spirits, weighted by documentation if not by supernatural presence. The Ansonia does not need ghosts to feel haunted. It has names, dates, police reports, newspaper archives, 7 confirmed deaths, and likely more unconfirmed. That is haunting enough without adding ectoplasm to limestone. Residents today live with this knowledge. They choose the building despite its history, or because of it. or while carefully avoiding thinking too deeply about why certain floors feel different than others. The ghosts that never left are not spectral. They are memorial, present in the architecture itself, in the windows that still open, in the walls that still absorb sound, in the height that still offers both views and velocity. The Ansonia is haunted by possibility, by the knowledge that luxury could not prevent tragedy, and by the question every resident confronts when standing near an open window on an upper floor. What brought those men to this moment, and how certain am I that I am different? Today, the Ansonia still stands, renovated but never forgiven. The building turned 120 years old in 2024. There were no grand celebrations, no gala events in the lobby, no commemorative plaques acknowledging the anniversary. The Ansonia survived into its second century the way it survived its first, quietly, stubbornly, without apologizing for what it witnessed or contained. The cooperative conversion stabilized finances without erasing complexity. Units trade on the open market now. Prices fluctuate based on square footage, floor, level, and renovation status. A two-bedroom suite on a lower floor might sell for $1.2 million. An updated three-bedroom on an upper floor might reach $2.5 million. The numbers reflect Manhattan real estate logic. Location, size, condition. They do not reflect history, but history still influences who buys and who avoids. Real estate listings never mention the suicides. Legal counsel advises against it. New York disclosure laws do not require reporting deaths that occurred decades ago in units that have since been renovated and resold multiple times. Brokers show apartments without volunteering information. Prospects do not specifically request. The building's reputation remains accessible to anyone who researches. But research requires initiative. Many buyers never look beyond finishes and floor plans. Those who do research face a decision: live inside documented tragedy or choose somewhere without that weight. Some find the history romantic. Others find it repellent. A surprising number find it irrelevant. They argue that every old building in Manhattan contains tragedy if you dig deep enough. The Ansonia is unusual only because its tragedies were documented and concentrated. Choosing to avoid it means avoiding most of the city's historic housing stock. Better to accept that beauty and pain coexist in old structures and focus on the beauty. Current residents span demographics: young professionals who work in tech and media, retired couples who moved in decades ago and refused to leave, artists drawn to atmosphere, families who inherited units and kept them as investments. The mixture creates the kind of community high-rises in Manhattan rarely achieve. Forced proximity across generations and professions, shared governance requirements, collective stake in a structure too large for any individual to control. The building itself shows its age gracefully in some areas, awkwardly in others. The lobby retains grandeur, marble floors, restored, chandeliers, brass fixtures polished weekly, but climb to upper floors and you find inconsistency. Some corridors look renovated, others look tired. Paint peels near radiators, carpets wear thin. The building needs constant maintenance and receives it sporadically based on budget constraints and owner votes. The windows remain original in many suites. Large casement windows that open outward with minimal resistance. Owners could replace them with modern alternatives. Double-paned, energy-efficient, locked mechanisms. Some have, most have not. The windows are part of the building's character, part of its history. Replacing them feels like erasing something essential, even if that something enabled tragedy. Management now requires safety reviews for any unit that comes up for sale, not legally mandated, just policy. Inspectors check window locks and structural integrity. They document findings and recommend upgrades. Buyers receive reports before closing. This creates transparency. Without creating legal liability, the building acknowledges risk without admitting fault. The reputation has softened over decades. Younger buyers did not live through the 70s crashes. They did not know people who jumped. The stories feel distant, historical, less threatening than present concerns like rising maintenance fees and aging infrastructure. The Ansonia's dark past competes with its architectural significance and prime location. For many, location wins. Still, certain floors remain harder to sell. The 14th floor, especially. Brokers know this. They price units slightly lower, market them to buyers specifically interested in history, emphasize the high ceilings and original details. Hope purchasers do not ask which window Richard Hammond used in 1957, or how many others followed his trajectory from that particular stretch of limestone. The building has also attracted academic interest. Researchers study it as a case study in architecture and mental health, how design influences behavior, how isolation manifests in luxury housing, how buildings can create environmental conditions that amplify psychological stress. The Ansonia appears in papers about urban planning and public health, not celebrated, just examined. A cautionary example of unintended consequences. Tour companies occasionally include it in historic walking tours of the Upper West Side. Guides point out the Beaux-Arts details and mention famous residents like Babe Ruth and Igor Stravinsky. Some mention the suicides, others skip that part. Depends on the audience and the guide's comfort with darkness. The building does not object either way. It has survived worse than being discussed by tourists. What the Ansonia has achieved is unlikely survival. It should have been demolished in the 1980s when occupancy crashed and finances collapsed. It should have been converted to condominiums or hotels or offices, but it persisted as residential cooperative housing, imperfectly, expensively, with ongoing complications. But it persisted. That persistence carries cost. The building will never escape its reputation completely. Every few years, a journalist writes another article about the broker suicides. The story gets shared online. New residents discover what they bought into. Some feel deceived. Others feel connected to something larger than themselves. The building does not care. It contains them all the same. The Ansonia today is neither palace nor prison. It is a compromise. Beautiful and flawed. Historic and burdened. Expensive and fragile. It offers residents connection to New York's past in exchange for accepting that past's complexity. You cannot live here and pretend history is clean. The walls remember. The windows remember. And whether you believe in ghosts or not, the building will remind you that luxury alone has never been enough to save anyone from themselves. The Ansonia proves that protection without connection eventually turns inward. William Earl Dodge Stokes built the Ansonia to solve a problem: how to give wealthy New Yorkers everything they wanted without exposing them to anything they feared. His solution was architectural isolation. Walls thick enough to block the city, suites large enough to contain entire lives, services comprehensive enough to eliminate need for external contact. He succeeded brilliantly. The building protected residents from noise, poverty, dirt, and proximity to struggle. But isolation is not neutral. It creates absence. And absence, when extended across years and floors and hundreds of residents, becomes its own form of violence. The Ansonia taught people to live without witnesses, to succeed privately, to fail privately, to celebrate and suffer in rooms where sound did not escape and neighbors did not intrude. This seemed like luxury until luxury became loneliness, and loneliness became lethal. The 7 confirmed suicides were not random. They were consequences of design, meeting desperation. The building provided everything except what the jumpers needed most: connection. Someone who heard them struggling. Someone who noticed when the light stayed on too late or the curtains stayed closed too long. Someone who violated privacy long enough to ask if everything was okay. The Ansonia's walls prevented all of that, and when financial markets collapsed and careers dissolved and identities based on success confronted failure, those walls became the difference between intervention and death. This is not paranormal. It is structural. The building was designed as a refuge from the world. When the world invaded anyway through market volatility and career collapse, residents had nowhere to retreat. They were already inside the deepest refuge Manhattan offered. When that refuge failed to protect them, the only remaining option was escape. And the building provided that too. 17 floors of height, windows that opened without resistance, early morning hours, when doormen focused outward and neighbors slept behind soundproof walls. The Ansonia enabled tragedy not through malice, but through fulfilling exactly the isolation its architect promised. The broader lesson extends beyond the building. Luxury as product has always promised escape. Escape from noise, from crowds, from the friction of living among others who might need something from you. Modern luxury is noise-canceling headphones and private jets and gated communities and penthouses where the city becomes scenery instead of something you touch. The Ansonia pioneered this vision. It proved the concept viable. It also proved the concept dangerous, because humans are not designed for isolation. We are social animals who regulate ourselves through contact with others. Remove that contact and our internal voices amplify without external perspective. Depression deepens without friends who notice. Anxiety spirals without colleagues who intervene. Success metrics become tyrannical without loved ones who remind us that worth transcends quarterly earnings. The Ansonia removed all of that. It gave residents permission to live entirely alone inside their own minds. For artists, that worked. For brokers under market pressure, it killed. The building stands today as monument to this contradiction. It is beautiful, genuinely beautiful. The Beaux-Arts facade deserves preservation. The grand lobby deserves admiration. The scale and ambition deserve respect. But beauty does not erase function, and the Ansonia's function was always isolation disguised as protection. That function continues. Modern residents still live behind 3-foot walls in soundproof suites, where neighbors remain strangers, despite sharing the same address for years. What has changed is awareness. Current residents know the history. They choose the building despite it or because of it, but not in ignorance of it. That knowledge creates responsibility. To check on neighbors. To notice when something seems wrong. To violate the culture of privacy just enough to prevent the building from claiming more lives. Whether residents actually fulfill that responsibility is an open question, but at least now they know it exists. The Ansonia also teaches us about ambition. The men who jumped were not failures by most measures. They were brokers and traders and portfolio managers. They had achieved enough success to afford apartments in a prestigious building, but they measured themselves against impossible standards. Always more profit, always better performance, always climbing. When markets turned and climbing became falling, they perceived themselves as worthless, The building did nothing to correct that perception. It simply absorbed their despair the way it absorbed everything else. We build monuments to success and ignore the wreckage success creates. The Ansonia is both monument and wreckage, palace and pressure chamber. The building Stokes imagined and the building that actually existed were never the same. One was dream. The other was limestone and copper and human suffering. Both are true. Both deserve acknowledgement. The final question is whether architecture can learn from tragedy, whether future buildings will prioritize connection alongside privacy, whether designers will understand that walls should protect without isolating. The Ansonia suggests the answer is no, because luxury still sells isolation. High-end developments still advertise soundproofing and private elevators and separation from the city. The lesson has not been learned because the market does not reward learning it. So the Ansonia stands, survived into a century that did not expect it, housing residents who choose it for reasons Stokes never imagined. Beautiful and burdened, historic and haunted not by ghosts, but by knowledge. The building proves that you can engineer safety, but not happiness, that you can design silence, but not peace, that you can build walls 3 feet thick and still fail, protect the people inside them from themselves. What luxury cannot save is this: the human need for witness, for someone who knows you beyond your productivity, for connection that survives market crashes and career failures and the worst versions of yourself. The Ansonia offered everything except that. And in the space where connection should have been, 7 men found only windows and silence and gravity and the terrible freedom of knowing that no one would hear them fall until they had already landed. The building absorbed them all, just as Stokes designed it to, completely, quietly, without allowing disruption to spread beyond necessary boundaries. The question is not why men fell from the Ansonia. It is why we keep building palaces that teach people they are safer alone.